Hey there, welcome to the House Music Connection podcast. I'm your host, Tony Fuel. Each week, I have a conversation with a different artist where we discuss personal stories, challenges, successes, production process, and more. Ultimately, the goal is for all of us to feel a greater sense of connection to the house music community and to one another. So let's get right into the conversation. Hey there, Sean. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for listeners' sake, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience or to the community?
Great. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Sean Dexter, and I've been a DJ since the mid 80s, and I'm still doing it today. I also make music as well. I've been in radio and clubs pretty much since I started. Um, it's my music is my passion. I'm definitely into like so many different genres of music. Um, and so that's kind of my thing, music for sure.
Yeah, cool. So you're currently living in San Francisco. You've been there since 2009. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. But I also know that you've lived in other cities. Can you say a little bit about maybe some of the cities that you've lived in?
Yeah. So I grew up in Philly. I lived there for half my life, I would say. And then I actually moved from there to New York City in the 90s. And I lived in New York for most of the 90s. Even before living there, I was constantly going there because it's so close to Philly. And it's an easy commute. And then after that, around the end of the 90s, like 98, I moved back to Philly for a while. And then I ended up leaving again in 2003, and I moved to Vancouver, BC for a while. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of really great people that I'm still working with, which is really cool. And I ended up going from there to Seattle, Washington for a while. Then I ended up relocating to Chicago, and I lived there for a few years. Um, if you've never been to Chicago and you're into house and techno, you have to go there. It is just different than everywhere else, and it really, for me, it really kind of opened my eyes to like a whole completely different level of music for sure. And then after that, I ended up moving out here, and I've been here for almost 15 years.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So how are the scenes different or the same from city to city?
Philly has a really great scene. It's been going on for a very long time. It's interesting because when the rave scene was kind of starting, most of the people early on that were involved in it, like myself, kind of came from like the punk rock and industrial scene. So it was a lot of the same people. Being that Philly is such a music town that people are really into a lot of different things. So that scene is still going on, which is really great. And then New York City in the 90s was probably the most incredible experience for me.
I can imagine.
I worked. Yeah, I worked at some record stores, and I got to know a lot of really great people. But the best thing about it is that no matter what kind of music you're into, there's like a club for it. And the rave scene was probably the best time I've ever had. The rave and club scene. It was just like everybody. It was very different from today. It was definitely more communal and positive.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I mean, it helped me, especially in the early days, to kind of shape my sound as a DJ and, where I kind of wanted to take my music. New York City was very eclectic. DJs played longer sets, so they were able to kind of open up and play different genres of music. And I would say the scene in Vancouver, BC is pretty good too. There's a lot of really great people doing things out there. I played some parties and met some really great people. Definitely a like a more community type scene when I lived there, for sure. Same with Seattle. I would say that they were kind of similar. There were a lot of people making music and DJing at the times that I lived there. And, for the most part, they were all really friendly and kind of welcomed me into, what was going on there. Um, and the scene here, has a rich history, especially, with raves and underground parties and clubs. It's definitely changed over the years, I would say. I wasn't here during its heyday. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but from what I'm understanding from friends of mine, that it's definitely like anywhere, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a lot different now than it was back then. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say living in Chicago was a really eye-opening experience because like
Mm-hmm.
here or Seattle or Vancouver or even Philly or New York, the scene there has, I mean, it's been there since the beginning, and so when, like, for example, like the first time once I landed there, I went out like a few weeks after I had arrived, and I went to this club called Zentra, and it was a huge club, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it was Craig Loftus, Frankie Knuckles, and there was another DJ. It'll come to me when it doesn't matter, but um, what was amazing is that the music was definitely a real mix of new and old, which you don't really hear that often. But not only that, but everybody on the dance floor, it was such a melting pot of people, from like people in their 70s to like,
Mm-hmm.
people in their early 20s. And everybody was just super friendly. A lot of people were jacking, and, it was just something that you could just tell that it was just so different from everywhere else because of its culture and history. It reminded
Mm-hmm.
me of New York City in the 90s, but it was
Mm-hmm.
still just very laid back, but everybody is into it. I mean, house music in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago is huge, and it's,
Right.
it remains that way to this day. I mean, if you were to go out tonight, you could hear world-class DJs that play everywhere in their hometown, just
Mm-hmm.
killing it. And so I went out and listened to everybody. For me, I try to like learn and grow every time I go out, and listen to things or mixing
Mm-hmm.
techniques or selection, how they're reading the crowd. It seemed to me that in Chicago, reading the crowd was like super important. Giving them
Mm-hmm.
exactly what they needed at the right time was something that was just pretty incredible.
Yeah. So on that, are you able to go out and I guess like not analyze and like, I mean, because some of us have, some of us who are DJs and producers, who've been in the scene for a long time. We start producing or, whatever, like we're, DJing, we go and we can't help but like analyze
Right.
everything. And like, because we want to learn, like you said, are you ever able to like kind of turn that off and then just like lose yourself without making it about
Yeah,
a learning
absolutely.
experience? Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, it's always a learning experience, but
Yeah.
like, so I went out a couple weeks ago to hear Jimster,
Mm,
and he was really good. Definitely different from what I've experienced.
mm-hmm,
And but what was really great was David Harness and Homero Espinoza opened the night, and they were
mm,
both just absolutely amazing. And
mm,
from the time I went with Sensei and his wife, and
mm,
I immediately went to the dance floor because for me, I started as a dancer and a record
mm,
collector before I was even, mixing
mm,
or any of that kind of stuff. So like I completely lost myself for most of the night, and
mm,
I try to do that, especially like when I lived in New York. Even though I was like learning, at some point in the night, you just kind of, especially if the music is really good, you just kind of lose yourself in it, and even while you're losing yourself in it, you're still like taking it in and
mm.
kind of analyzing it, but not in a negative way. Just like, oh wow, that
Yeah.
feels good, or that's
Yeah.
a, I like that sound right there. I need to find stuff with that sound, that kind of thing. But yeah, it but in the same term, when you go out and the DJ is just, not really bringing it, it's easier to fall into that trap of just like kind of over analyzing what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I have that skill of turning it off. If I've really mastered that skill yet, but
It's not
yeah,
easy, especially because
no,
it's like, it's your love, it's your passion. So like
yeah,
when you hear others doing it, you want it
yeah,
to be on the level that, you consider yourself to be on musically,
yeah, for sure. All right, so do you have a favorite city? Are you I'm kind of thinking that maybe you're alluding to Chicago, maybe as your favorite
Yeah,
city. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
If I could tell you this much, if the weather in Chicago was not the way it is with snow, I mean,
mm-hmm,
I would probably move back there in a heartbeat, especially if it was like, more mild. But
mm, yeah,
the day I moved out here, there were snow tornadoes and, a thunder
mm,
snowstorm. And it's just,
yeah,
they call it Chiberia, especially in the winter, which lasts quite a while. They joke that there are two seasons, 4th of July and winter
mm-hmm,
in
yeah,
Chicago. But yeah, I mean, I used to live down the street from Smart Bar, so I was like,
mm,
I could go there whenever I wanted to. And Smart Bar is probably one of the best clubs in the world, without a doubt. And
mm,
the vibe in there, the people that go there are just really into the music. So yeah, Chicago's easily the best place for that.
yeah. Yeah, I live in Minneapolis now, or Minnesota now. I'm actually about an hour and a half south of Minneapolis. And yeah, those winters are just, I'll say
Hot.
that you can get a lot of music made because you're
Oh
kind of
yeah.
hibernating.
Oh yeah, you can't go anywhere.
Hibernating. And I actually hosted a monthly event, and February was like probably like one of the least attended months, even though we had like an out of town guest and everything. It was just,
Right.
yeah, it's just, people just don't want to go out as much.
No.
I mean, of
No.
course, you've got some diehards,
Oh
they'll
yeah.
make it no matter what, rain or shine or whatever. But yeah, it definitely can be, yeah, a little bit debilitating when it's that
Absolutely.
cold. Yeah.
I mean, if it was somebody really good, like I used to go
Mm-hmm.
to the Green Dolphin a lot in Chicago, and even if the weather was bad, um,
Mm,
the party was called the Boom Boom Room. The music was just so amazing,
mm,
especially when the main room opened up. That like it didn't matter if it was cold, rainy, snowy. That was going there. You knew no matter what that it was going to be an amazing night. So um, the weather didn't usually deter me, but you know during
yeah.
the it's just unless you've lived in the Midwest, you don't really
Mm-hmm.
know what like that kind of weather is
Right.
anywhere.
That's a whole new level. Yeah. So speaking of
Yeah,
Chicago, you were featured a few years ago in Five magazine
yeah,
for your
yeah.
mix series. Can you,
Right.
yeah, how did, can you say more about your mix series that was featured?
Yeah. So I've been doing like a kind of a radio show called Bay Area Beatbox
Mm,
since I moved out here. In fact, it started out by me just posting mixes on Mixcloud and just under my own name. And I was discovered kind of by this woman from Holland. Her name is
mm,
Corrine, and she heard one of my mixes, and she was part of a radio station called Pure Radio in Holland, and asked me to
mm,
submit a mix, and they did like a one shot, and it went over really well. So I started doing it monthly.
mm,
At first, just to kind of build a following, I didn't have any guests; it was just me. And
yeah.
as it started to really build up over a couple of years, I started incorporating guests, and I would, I kind of aimed high. I would reach out to people that I would think would never ever be interested in being on the show, along with like up and comers and locals in
Mm-hmm.
the area. Um, and it really started to take off from there. Which was pretty
Nice.
amazing, unexpected, And at that
Yeah.
time, I was still kind of playing vinyl and Serato control vinyl, so I wasn't really creating the way that I do now. But
Mm,
after a while, the station kind of went through some growing pains, and I ended up moving on to Underground Collective Radio in the UK. And I'm still an artist on there, although because of some situations that are gone, like we talked about before, where I'm moving, I've kind of put it on hold. But the show really took off from there. I got to have amazing guests like Paul Johnson, DJ Vavona from Italy, and a lot of friends of mine would be on the show. There was like almost a whole year where I just featured Bay Area artists and DJs from Chicago, because I felt like that wasn't really, in other radio shows, like maybe that wasn't the focus. And so they would send me an hour guest mix, and then I would mix for 2 or 3 hours. And as the show built, it really started to do well, like on Mixcloud. Underground Collective has a huge following on Mixcloud, and so they would do the show live. They would rebroadcast the mix that I would upload for them, and it started charting. Like every show ended up on like several charts, which was really cool. I mean, I'm not a huge proponent of charts because it's really about the
Yeah.
music, but it was still nice to see people
Yeah.
recognizing it and following it. And it helped me build up a following on Mixcloud as well. Especially during the pandemic, I went live on Mixcloud like all the time. And so it kind of progressed from there to where it's at now. But once I relocate, I'm going to have to kind of switch up the name and kind of take it, to a different level. Probably back on an Underground Collective. I really like the people that run the station. They're DJs as well, so they get it. Um, and but it's really branched out. Like I've done Bay Area Beatbox live on Fantasy FM in the UK, where I would go live from my place here, and I do it on Twitch and Mixcloud Live. So it's really taken off. Um, the interview in Five Magazine was really great, unexpected, and a lot of fun to do. Especially like Five Magazine is just, man, a great magazine that features a lot of amazing artists. So to be included in that was like, really special to me for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we've talked about the mix show, so DJing, and then, so have you DJed very much in clubs? And I guess what are your thoughts on DJing in clubs versus DJing in like for like a radio show?
Well, DJing in clubs is really great. I've been doing it for quite a while. And I've played in all the cities that I've lived in and traveled to some that were close by. It's definitely like instant gratification, with the crowd and yourself, especially when you have those moments where you're just, all of you are one, and everybody is flowing together. A great example of that, I played back in 2000, I think 2001. I was still living in Philly, and I went out to play this big party in Decatur, Illinois, in the middle of nowhere, in this warehouse. And I was originally supposed to just go and hang out, and I gave a buddy of mine a mixtape, and apparently something happened with the mixtape. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they only got like a 20-minute mix, and the tape was like, it was like 120-minute tape, right? And it had like all kinds of cool stuff on it. And so the promoter actually reached out to me and asked me if I would come out and play, and I was just like, wow, yeah, absolutely. And I figured I'd be playing in the side room, as someone who at that time, didn't have a huge name or anything like that. I mean, I'm still like, an underground DJ now, but so so I get there, and the main room is huge, and then there's a side room. So we show up, and obviously that was vinyl, um, and I went out
Yeah.
there with my record case, and the promoter, he walks by the side room, and I'm like, "Are we dropping my stuff off in there?" And he's like, no, you're going to play in the main room. And I was like, wait, what? And the headliner was Stacy Kidd.
Oh
And so I
wow.
love Stacy Kidd's music, right?
Yeah.
And so it was an unbelievable experience. In fact, I went on and I played for I was supposed to play for like 2 hours, and then the DJ that was supposed to go on after me was like, "No, you keep playing." And in the middle of my set, um, I actually was playing Underground Sound of Lisbon track that ends in like all these crazy ambient sounds, and it was a big sound system, and again, this is vinyl; it's not digital, so
Yeah.
I brought Steve Miller Band Fly Like an Eagle, the album, right? And I was determined to play it. And like my friend was like, I pulled it out and I showed it to him, and he was like, "Don't do it, don't do it. It's gonna kill the vibe," right? And so I start fading it in on top of these ambient sounds, and everybody's just kind of like, everybody was feeling it, whether they were on something or not, and as soon as the guitar hit, the room just erupted of people like clapping and yelling, and they started like slow dancing to it, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And then I went right back into it as the ambient sounds at the end start. And I mean, that experience was like life changing. It proved to me that if you read the crowd and you can play anything at any time, as long as they're ready for it, and be brave. And so I mean, every city kind of has that, that vibe that I've noticed. Playing in clubs, you get that right away. You can really connect with people on that level. But radio is kind of, it's like you're connecting with people, but even if you're going live or pre-recorded, you don't really, you can still gain that connection with people in the chat room, but it's definitely not
Yeah.
the same as like,
Yeah.
being out there, and like, it's a whole experience when you're playing live for sure.
Yeah. So, reading the crowd, what are your tactics for doing that? I mean, what does that even mean? Is that just like feeling a certain vibe, or is it just like looking at their faces and like what they're doing? I mean, what's your take on that?
So, um, as somebody who started out like, as a dancer, going to clubs and going in the circle and, doing all that stuff, like for me, when I look out at people, like even when I play now, like I think I don't really think of the songs as songs. I think of like specific rhythms. So like if I'm playing and I'm playing like something soulful, I might think, man, they need some like heavier drums on top of this. So let me like, and they look like they're ready for it, and the energy is there. So maybe I'll drop like a drum track on top of it and create something special that takes the crowd up to a different level. For me, it's like just looking at I focus on the dancers, like the real deal heads. I mean, everybody in the room is super important, obviously, but
Yeah.
when you have people where like the rhythm is in their soul, when you look at them, like for me as somebody who can connect to that, like that's, I focus on that. I'm like, all right, these guys are, or ladies are going off right now on this sound. I think I'm gonna give them this, and it usually works out. It's not foolproof, but
Yeah.
most of the time, it works. And I definitely think that with the way things are now, where people don't really play more than an hour, or two at the most, like two is considered like an extended set in some
Yeah.
places, that you don't really get the opportunity to kind of do that and,
Yeah.
read the crowd and connect and on a different level than just, playing songs. So like it's a kind of a lost art, I would say.
Yeah.
I try to do it even if I'm playing a shorter set, but I definitely think we need to go back to like having like fewer DJs. So, like you can really, I mean, I'm used to playing all night. That's really how I came up, where when you were a resident DJ, you weren't the opener. it was your night to create and play most of it, you know? And so that isn't really what's happening now.
Yeah, well, I think some of that has to do with the fact that right now there are about as many, if not more, DJs than there are dancers, and I think that it used
Yes.
to be
Yeah.
that people would go to a rave or a party or just a club, and they would go just to dance, and
Yeah.
now everybody's DJ. So I don't know if that plays into the decision making that the promoters, you know, running through as they think about who to book on the lineup.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, there's so many DJs. I want to try to get try to, I want to be as inclusive as possible and still have
Right.
it make sense in some way. It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things have
It's a
changed so
tough one.
much. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Quite a
I wish we
bit.
could go. I wish we could kind of go back to the days where there were more dancers, but also I understand why people want to become DJs, because they
Yeah. It's
want to
fun.
share that joy. They want to
Yeah.
share that
Yeah. I mean,
joy
I
with
love it.
other people. So yeah,
Right.
it's
Right.
fun.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know,
yeah,
it definitely was a more creative time because of that. You know,
yeah.
especially when most of the people that were getting into DJing, you know, in the late 80s and the 90s, it was really about self-expression and creativity. And
Yeah,
everybody was kind of had a different sound. Whereas today, you know, I find that a lot of the DJs that play, and it's, you know, anywhere, it could be any city, a lot of them just kind of play the same stuff or have the same sound and don't
mm,
really change tempos or rhythms or BPM. So, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You want to, you know, with the cool kids, it's more about like being seen as a DJ.
mm,
Where like for me, like I definitely am not a look at me person. You know what I mean? Like I really just like I love the music. I'm a big nerd, uh, and like that's what kind of drew me into the music is because everybody was kind of like a misfit back then.
yeah, yeah. That's true. And
Yeah.
now DJing, I mean, it just kind of grew, and then the popularity of dance music, it kind of died for a little bit, but then it came
Right.
back, like, with even like bigger with EDM,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
onset and whatnot. And I think it's kind of like gone, the pendulum has swung the other way to where people are wanting to hear, more real music, or more, I guess, authentic sounds or whatever is like good, not too overly produced and whatnot. So
Right.
it's just
It's
interesting to
getting
see all
there.
the cycles. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been like a journey from even
Yeah.
before I started. It was, you know, the DJ would play all night and take you on a journey, you know, through
Yeah.
different sounds and emotions, and you know, that's definitely something that I don't see it like that the way that it was these days. I
Mm,
mean, there's nothing wrong with what's going on. I mean, give or take,
yeah.
but you know, that's something that made, you know, house music and techno so special is that
Mm,
they're, you know, every time a DJ would come on, it didn't even matter like who they were. It was really like everybody was just on the dance floor, no cell phones, you know, none of that stuff. So it was just like the energy like was in the room and everybody that
mm,
was there was present. You know, being in a place
yeah.
and being present in a place is very different. You know, I like when I went out last week, there were a lot of people dancing, but there were also a lot of people just kind of scrolling on their phones. And it's like,
Mm,
why, you know, like for me, like
mm,
I think I took some pictures and then that was just about, you know, with friends.
yeah.
And that was pretty much it. Like I just wanted to cut loose, you know?
Yeah. So I interviewed Risa Garcia from New York City, and I'm not sure if her episode will come out before or after this one, but uh, she talks about how she actually started a party series, Dancing Room Only, because she was kind of like tired of that whole cell phone phenomenon. I mean, she doesn't like may have a rule where you can't use your cell phones, but really the concept of the night is like, dance and, be present, like you're saying. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. I mean, it's really what the music
Yeah.
is about. I mean, those early tracks in the early days weren't even
Mm-hmm.
made very well, you know, and but people it had a vibe, and people were just like gravitating to it, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, like you could play like a song 2 or 3 times in the night to get people to be into it. And
Mm-hmm.
now you don't have time for that, and
Yeah.
people's attention span seem to be less and less as years go by.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about production.
Okay.
So a lot of the guests that I've had on the podcast are the DJs, and they host parties, and they were also producers. So I think it's only a natural progression at some point for a lot of us who love the music to start producing. And I know that you've had some tracks out there. So I guess,
Yeah.
when did you start producing, and what
um,
prompted that?
so growing up, I was always like into music. So like I played some instruments in school. I was in bands and things like that in school and in college. Small little things that were, one-off opportunities and things like that. So I was always kind of into that. And then when I started getting more and more into house, I just kind of was like fascinated by how it was made. And being that I was a dancer and collected records, and I started to my early days of DJing was really just on the radio, so there was no real mixing. Um, but once I got into the mixing, I started to really gravitate towards learning how to make music. And one thing I can tell you is there's no right or wrong way to make music. Like, it's an art,
Mm,
and everybody has their own take on it. But um, it was actually when I moved back from New York City at the end of the '90s. I I became friends with someone. His name is June Lopez, and he is a multi instrumentalist in Philly. We're still friends to this day. And he was going through some stuff. I was getting back into the Philly scene, and things just kind of worked out. And he invited me over to his house where his studio was, and we started working on music. And I knew then that that was going to be part of my life, whether it was professionally or just for fun or whatever. Um, and we made a bunch of stuff, and we got some things signed, and it just kind of took off from there. Where I would early on, I would have to partner with other people because I didn't have the gear. I just had like these ideas,
mm,
and collaborating is awesome. But
mm,
I really wanted to just kind of do it myself. And actually, it took a while of collaborating with other people to like really find like my own thing, which really happened when I lived in Chicago. I just felt like there was so much going on that I just wanted to do things. And so, especially in the winter, I would just constant like I was using Acid Pro
mm,
and just kind of making like stuff. And some of it got signed in Europe. And one of the tracks took off, but I never saw money or fame from it for sure. But a lot of people were playing it. It ended up on like it was called Afterthought. It was signed
mm,
to Plusquam. The guy that signed the contract, he ended up having a huge dispute with the rest of the people that were running the outfit, and he left. And so
mm,
they basically kept my music and licensed it to like compilations and things like that. And I didn't even know. Um,
mm.
until I was on like Apple Music or something like that. And I was like, I Googled it, I searched it, and I was like, wow, this is like everywhere. How did that
Yeah.
happen? And, but it just kind of went on from there. And then when I moved out here, I really kind of honed it in, especially in like, 2011, around that time. I was just like spending a lot of time trying to, make tracks and, get them signed to different labels. And but as an artist, and I'm sure like this has probably been brought up by anybody that you've interviewed that makes music, is that you have to be more guarded about who you're sending your stuff to. Like I, especially after my experience with Plusquam, I was just like, I want my music back in a few years. So now
Mm,
even if it doesn't make any money, which the music business is definitely with digital music, I don't think anybody's making like real money like the early days.
Not
Just
from
because
record
of
sales. No,
no.
it's all about 360 now.
Right. And, like things like Spotify, you're not making that money. It's great that people are, you're getting your art exposed to a lot of people, but it's not really, how it used to be where you could actually get, a small amount of money for your tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Contracts are not really anything like they were before. So, for me, like I make a lot of music, but I don't necessarily sign a lot to a lot of labels
Mm.
these days. Although I've worked with some really great people that have, given me back my music or had that as part of the team. Especially, I've done a lot of work for Deep in Sound in
Mm.
Vancouver, BC, which is Vernon Douglas and Jay Tripwire's record label that has quote unquote been around since the early days of the Fabric nightclub and things like that. And even the remixes, they've always let me kind of put them up on my Bandcamp page through, my small little label. And so, it's more of a community thing
Mm.
with the people that I work with now. Just because, I'm guarded, which, I've heard this from a lot of my friends that are producers, that it's just, for them, it's just not, if you're giving you don't want to give away your music. It's, you still want it to be yours. And if you ever
Mm-hmm.
want it back, which has been happening a lot, I've noticed a lot of like producers that have been out there, in the trenches, have been starting to put up their older material. um, they've gotten permission to put it up, which, years ago that never would have happened. They would just say,
Mm-hmm.
no, you can't do that. We own it now, even
Yeah.
though we didn't pay you.
Yeah. There's
Yep.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't think that a lot of these people, a lot of these labels that aren't paying, I don't think that they're necessarily like, they have sinister intentions. I think that they
Oh
just
no,
like,
yeah,
they're artists too, and they're not necessarily business people, and sometimes
yeah.
they get in over their heads with the business side of things. And I mean,
It's
it's not an
expensive.
excuse.
I
Yeah, it's not
mean,
an excuse, but like, I
yeah,
think that, I don't know, I want to believe that people have the right intentions. Now, granted, yeah, there are going to be some like really crappy people out there that are just there to take advantage, but I
yes,
think for
there
the
are
most
snakes
most
in the
part, it's
grass for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I kind of want to talk a little bit, go back to like moving around to different cities. How do you, I guess, get involved in a new city when you move there? I know that you're probably not starting over from scratch because you have a network
Right.
already, kind of. But like,
Yeah.
how do you, I guess, involve yourself in a new city and navigate kind of the scene structure and the scene
Right.
politics
Right.
in a new
Um,
city?
well, I think that for me, especially like when I arrive, I try to like reach out in advance sometimes to people, either email or on the internet, and say, hey, I this is what I do, and I'm going to be moving there. Which actually, in Chicago, that actually happened. Like I met some people online, and I was like, hey, I'm moving there, and I'd love to come out and play. And some
Mm.
people were happy enough to kind of put me on. And that kind of happened in most places. Vancouver was very much like that. Seattle, San Francisco for sure. When I first got here, I actually met Erica Guzman, who goes by MC Party Mouth, and she really liked
Mm.
what I was doing. And so she invited me to play some of her parties that she was hosting and do some like renegades. And, it kind of became like a family thing,
Mm.
um, which, you got to do. Like, you got to kind of go out and introduce yourself. And it's not always easy, especially the older you get, to like go out all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
your priorities are a bit different as you get older. And
Right.
but to me, it's like, when you meet the real kindred spirits that have been around since like the early days and, understand the love and the passion for it as opposed to like the business element of it, I try to gravitate towards those people. And um, it's not always easy. I mean, Chicago was definitely not easy at first. The scene is very interesting there, for sure. Um, there's it's like in Seattle, there's like a Starbucks on every corner, and in Chicago, there's like a DJ on every corner. Like there's so many, and there's most of them are really really good. And I had to break some barriers. Um, in that city, especially like being a white guy. uh, in fact, like my name, Sean Dexter, it sounds very ethnic. So like before I actually, met anybody in person, they were surprised to see me in person,
Oh,
based on
yeah.
the fact that I loved house music and had an ethnic sounding name. But which was actually fun. Like it was cool, and it was I was accepted. You know, on a level that was really really great.
So how do you break down those barriers?
Well, I've always, I grew up being raised to believe that you should always be yourself. And if you're always yourself, then, people will gravitate towards that, and, that's kind of how I've always like rolled, and it's easier to meet people when you're, like I'm real goofy, like I like to have fun and, just be myself, regardless of the music or anything. So I think that when you're all those barriers go away and the love for the music is really present, that you know that stuff tends to not matter as much. The longer you build relationships and friendships with people, they just kind of I accept people for who they are, and I try to gravitate towards people who feel the same way. There's always the beginning of friendships where I'm sure like yourself you've probably been burned a bunch of times over the years by people, and so everybody is kind of guarded.
Yeah.
But if for me, I just wanted to be down, like I just wanted to play and have fun and meet people, and so like I said, after a while things just kind of go away, and like that are negatives. And that definitely happened in Chicago for sure. It was a really cool scene. I mean, the music's for everybody. The crowd is very multicultural. But one thing that I would say in today's world of house music, especially that it's such a global phenomenon. In Europe, it's definitely more commercial and popular. Stuff
Yeah.
that you would consider underground here is not underground over there, and because it's grown so much, a lot of people don't know the roots of the music. And this music, whether it's techno or house, um, started out, it's black music. It was made by black and Latino people, and it you have to respect that's where it came from. And to me, that is a big problem, because a lot of people that were there from the beginning, even before I got into it, were, it was a different, it was a lot of people that came from, marginalized backgrounds and created this
Yeah.
amazing music for people, and
Right.
multicultural people fell in love with it. But I think because a lot of people doing it now don't know the history, they tend to dismiss it. But it's house music and techno is a part of Black history, and
It
it's
is.
important to
Yeah.
respect that and know that, because like when I play, I try to keep those roots, and understand that, it is an honor to be playing this music as somebody who, is not of that background. So, And then in the global scene, like people don't really know. Like a lot of people might
Yeah.
think that techno started in Berlin by Caucasians, right? But
Yeah.
it's not. In fact, even like I remember I worked at a record store and I met one of the employees was like this young kid. And I was telling him, how I loved house music, and he was like, he was African American. He pointed, he's like, "Well, that's white people music," and I was like, "No, no, 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 no. This is techno,
Yeah.
and house is part of your history, and it's an important
Yeah.
part, and it started by people that you know you could relate to." And so like I try to keep that with me, especially when I play and when I'm meeting people.
Mm.
um, but I think definitely people need to be more aware of where this music came from. I mean,
Yeah.
you can argue all day on who actually started it, but to
Mm-hmm.
me there was a group of people, and most of them were African American and Latino, and not
Mm-hmm.
and gay. And
Yeah.
so
LGBT. Yeah.
yeah, and
For sure.
so like I think that that's also part of why things are the way they are now, where like, I remember I used to go out, there was this club in Philly called The Nile. And one of the probably the best DJ I've ever heard ever anywhere in the world. And I've heard a lot of DJs. His name was Donald Stone. Donald and I became really close friends because The Nile was a black gay club. And I had moved
Mm.
back from New York City and I needed the real house. I needed the real stuff. And I was told to go to this club.
Mm.
And a lot of really great DJs, Donald Stone in particular, Mike Maserati, Paulie Paul. It was a completely different vibe. And when I got in there, I was still a raver and a househead, but it was definitely drag queen heavy, definitely
Mm.
black. Until like 5 in the morning when the whiter clubs would close and everybody would come over there. It was an after hours. Donald would play till like he felt like stopping. And then there were times where I would get looks from people, get pushed off the dance floor, but after a while I just kept coming back. And so
Mm.
um, eventually I was accepted, and I used to go into the booth with Donald and watch him play. And Donald could, man, nobody could read the crowd like Donald. Donald would just like,
Mm.
I remember. And I'm in my 50s now, and this was when I was like in my 20s, and I still remember it. Like he was playing Voices by KC Flight, and people were going absolutely crazy in there. And
Mm.
and people started singing "I Can't Get No Sleep" by India, like on top of that song. And as they start singing it, he's mixing it on top of that. And it was just an
Mm.
energy level that you wouldn't find in like a club that was mostly white. And so,
Mm.
that is something that people really need to understand, that the pioneers of this stuff need to be recognized, and that it is, even though it's, very white now, it wasn't when it started, you
Right. And
know?
that's kind of my whole thing with like so I'm not quite 50 yet, but I remember when in the late 90s and the early 2000s when I was really discovering deep house. I mean, it was very soulful oriented, and then kind of in
Yeah.
the mid 2000s there was this other like style that they were calling deep house that was kind of like progressive light. It wasn't like the deep house that had that soulful like black music influence, and it was
Right.
just it's kind of I don't know, I wouldn't say blurred the lines, but it's like kind of muddied the waters a little bit as to what like deep house really is and whatnot. And I don't know, I feel like there's like two different types of deep two different styles of music that are called deep house, and like they're
Right.
very different. I mean, like
Yeah.
the deep house that comes out on Anjuna, it's great music, but it does not honor the
The
history
heritage. No,
of
not at
having
all.
that black music in it, so
Right.
it's a completely different emotion too. Like it's emotive, but it's not like deep and soulful in that way.
Right,
I don't know.
right. It
We can
doesn't
go
have
on.
that energy. And I
Yeah.
think that, a lot of that is because of, struggles
Yeah.
that people have had over the
Yeah.
years. And so, like, even with techno, and actually, I think, on some levels, techno it has become like more whitewashed than house music has. And like when I lived in New York, I worked for a promoter. His name is Matty Silver, and he decided to do a party where it was called Hardcore to Heaven, and it was like punk bands and like gabber DJs on the main floor, and then he invited all the Detroit DJs, and they were playing in the basement.
Hmm.
And I remember being at the office, and I was just like, probably like maybe like 19, 20, and I was sitting there in the office, and I was so excited to meet them. I mean, these are the pioneers, and they were very clear that this is Black music, and
Hmm.
that it is for Black people. And I was, I didn't know anything at that time, and I was, I
Hmm.
felt like, well, it's for everybody. But now, like as I went along, and I researched and learned the history, you know, it is Black music, even in the stage that it's in today. That's where it comes from, and you know, you really must respect that.
Hmm.
I think it's a major problem that is happening around the world, that it has, become something that is far from, where it started. And obviously, progression is going to happen. Technology has made it a lot easier to, to do this. But there's definitely, like, history needs to be on the forefront, so that way people don't
Hmm.
disrespect it. Because
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of, I would say there's a lot of racism in the music. And
Hmm.
which boggles my mind because,
Hmm.
how can you be in a music that's about love and understanding and escapism, and feel that way? But there's definitely a good amount of that, unfortunately. And I think if the history was more well known, it probably wouldn't be like that, that I've experienced.
Yeah, that might be just symptomatic of the culture, like the global like culture in as a whole. I mean, we are so like divided these days, and
Yeah,
it's, I don't know, things that you thought were in long ago in history are just like starting to like kind of come to the forefront now and again, or like rear its ugly head again. And yeah, it's
yeah,
just I don't know. I wonder if it's just symptomatic of things today or just technology. Who knows?
yeah. I
But
mean,
we're doing our
right,
part to make sure that people are
keeping it real, right?
getting, yeah,
Yeah,
getting
like
what's up.
I have a lot of respect for the people, that started it and are still doing it, and
Yeah.
going out there, and people are, a lot of people are trying to understand it, but globally, it's, if you don't live in an area where, you see a lot of DJs are from more ethnic backgrounds, you may not really understand that, where the culture started. So, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily their fault. But I'm not going to name any names, but there are some really well-known producers, that are like, one of them was, it would turned out they were, part of the Proud Boys, and
Oh
they're
my
still
goodness.
making techno music.
No.
Yes, yeah, I'm not going to say who it is, but if you Google it,
Mm.
you'll know. And to me, there is absolutely 100% no place in this music, or music in general, because honestly, like, almost every style of music comes from the blues, and the
Hmm.
blues is definitely where there was no white blues, and there was no struggle that would make blues music happen. And so, for me, like, rock, everything comes from Black music, and uh, it's been taken advantage of in every genre of music, uh,
Mm.
which is unfortunate. You can't. Pat Boone did a cover of a Little Richard song, and it went. It was huge, but the original is just. I mean, it's not even close. And that the same could be said for house music, where people of color are not necessarily recognized on the same level. I mean, some are.
Mm.
It's not cut and dry, right? There's a lot of gray area, but for sure, that's been happening in every kind of music over the years. And house and techno are definitely not immune to that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that there is still this issue because if you were to like, I don't know, if you were to put everybody in the same clothes and put them all in a room listening to house music, dancing to house music, you have no idea what their politics are. You have no
Right.
idea what their religious background is. And all you can see is, I mean, yeah, you can see kind of the color, but you don't know what their what everyone's experience or history, their growing up experience is. And
Right.
that's kind of the power that music has in a way of
Yeah,
like
for sure.
uniting people to, what people of all different kinds can come together. And
Right.
it's kind of a little microcosm of what the world could be like if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
were all
Especially like in the 90s
unified.
and
Yeah.
2000s,
Yeah.
it was multicultural
Yeah.
and it was still kind of new, relatively. And people knew who the pioneers were because they were
Mm,
out there doing it,
yeah.
and like I said, a lot of them are still traveling the world and playing. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people on the dance floor will probably have no idea what that was like in the beginning. I mean, not that they
Yeah.
need to, but like I've said, having an understanding of where the music comes from
Mm-hmm.
will make you more appreciative and humbled by the fact that you get to be involved in it, for sure.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
All right. So, what are some projects, or what is a project that you are working on that you're excited about that you, that you want listeners to know about?
Well, definitely, working with Sensei is definitely something that is a huge honor for me. I mean, I've known about his music going back years, and to like become friends and colleagues, and work on something we love together is like really important to me. The connecting with people and doing like releasing like guest mixes where they're giving me the opportunity to kind of put my sound out there. And right now, um, you know, I, I I don't feel like I play like everybody else. Especially with digital. I try to incorporate looping and live remixing and using a sampler and creating something that's unique and different. And not that it's better, because better is relative when it comes to art, but it's just different. And like when people hear, when you go out and hear somebody play, uh, the example would be last week, Jimster's sound. You knew it was Jimster. You knew
Mm,
that it was his sound. He was creating his vibe, whether you were into it or not. That's his sound. And
mm-hmm.
same with like Homero and David Harness. They all have their own unique sounds, and to be given that opportunity to work with people and make music and also release, or get booked to play because I sound different. It is, to me, that's really special. So like, working
Mm,
with those people, that's definitely something that, I'll miss when I relocate, in a few weeks. But, I think those relationships will be long lasting. But yeah, I mean, the working with Sensei is a huge thing. I got, over the past year, I got to work with George JJ Flores,
mm,
which is really great. He's awesome. Having Jay Tripwire remix my stuff is just stuff that, like, I mean, I'm just a kid from Philly. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, totally.
it's just, to me, it's like, wow, how did I end up with that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's surprising. Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprising what can happen when you just put something out there and just, I mean, there's been times where I've like put out tracks and I've put a lot of effort into, self-promoting, if you will,
Yeah.
just like trying to get the word out there. And there's some tracks that I put out that I don't know. I'm more like kind of relaxed into the letting things flow naturally, a little bit more organically. And sometimes those more like, I don't know, the ones that you spend the less time on,
The ones
less
that
energy.
they,
Yeah, the
yeah,
ones that pop or whatever. Yeah. So
right. I mean, like that's the thing with the
yeah,
music industry now, and I actually watched Sensei's interview with you, which is kind of why I
yeah,
reached out because
yeah,
he had some interesting things to say. You know, like you a lot of times you think like the music is going to just blow up, that it's just so unique and different, and it just flies under the radar. And we
yeah.
actually, um, I partner with George, and we made like I had just started the track, and I was like, hey, this needs your vocals on top of it. We need to do something, and it was a really raw, like acid track, and
Mm,
we were called Hypnotic Robotics, and it came out on Deepin, and we kind of put together like a really great group of remixers. I mean, it was Jay Tripwire, Vernon Douglas, um, George did a mix,
mm,
Sensei and Jason Merle did a mix, and it's like these amazing artists,
yeah,
and it completely flew under the radar. And it was just like it did. Even the remixes didn't sound like anything else that was out there at the time. So you never really know. I mean, everybody's
yeah.
it's art, so you can't really. You got to just kind of take that with a grain of salt. Like just
Yeah.
because it doesn't chart, or even if it does, it doesn't make it better or worse than something that that doesn't, right? Because you're
Right.
you're 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 basically putting your heart and your soul, the most vulnerable parts of yourself as an artist, you're putting it out there, and even though it's going to be scrutinized, you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
like, to me, just getting the music out there is the most important part, not the accolades, or and I've had some,
Yeah.
and I've had others where it won't go anywhere, and then I'll be in a club and I'll play it, and people are like, what is that? Like it's which I'm sure you've
Yeah.
experienced. You play one of your older tunes and you're like, this went nowhere. And every
Yeah.
time I play it, people get excited about it. That track that I had on Plusquam, Afterthought, like I still play it, and people usually come up and say, what's that? And it's like, to me, that's more important than charts and downloads and things like that, because everything
Hmm.
nowadays is manipulated, and to a certain degree. I was recently watching a video on YouTube where this guy talked about how labels will purposefully, get the song on a chart by having multiple people buy it. And
Yeah.
they'll get their money back for that promotion, but that's really what they're using the charts for. So if
Mm.
and it's very common practice. Like, I don't have an opinion about whether it's right or wrong, because it just is. But
Right.
that kind of takes away from what like what like a Billboard chart was back in the 90s. If like a remix or a house track charted on Billboard, it was like a huge track,
Well, it
whereas
depends.
now
I
it's
mean, if
like,
you're like talking about the sales chart, then yeah. But
yeah, like
then,
sound scans and
the dance club play that is basically just a panel of 170 DJs.
right.
There's a lot of pay for play in that
Oh
in terms
yeah,
of like
yeah, yeah.
those Billboard
uh,
charts. Yeah.
and there was a lot more money involved back then,
Oh, for
but
sure. Yeah.
like now it's like it you can buy 35 copies of your track on track source yourself.
Hmm.
You can have 35 of your friends buy it. It charts for like a day,
Yeah.
right? And then you
Depending on the chart.
right, it'll chart for
Yeah.
a little bit because like 100,000 tracks are coming out tomorrow, and
Yeah.
very few will have longevity in that situation. And
Yeah.
so it's a constant cycle of that, which to me isn't as important. Like, it's cool, like, shout out to people that live for that. Like
Yeah.
I said, it's art, and it's your music, and it's what you want to do.
I read
So,
this article not too long ago about, actually, it was a few years ago, about how, I don't know, I'll have to find it, but it's basically like long tail is working for no one.
right.
And it's that, I feel like, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but, I feel like sometimes labels might put something out every week because they see everyone else putting something out every week. And they want to keep up with the other labels or whatever, and it's just the shelf life is so much, like you were kind of saying, is so much
So
shorter
short.
these days. Yeah. And like
Yeah.
I remember I was doing like my mix series, Refuel Your Soul, like I was doing it every week for like 3 months. I tried it out for 3 months, and first of all, it was exhausting, but
It is a lot of
um
work for sure.
on top of family and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
like, I felt like, I felt like I wasn't getting to know my tracks very well because I was, playing these. I felt like I had to make it like a new,
Yeah.
made up of new tracks every single week. When that was a self-imposed, you know, constraint that I was putting on myself. But
Yeah.
you know, still, I felt like I had to put new tracks on every week because that's the cycle of the industry this day. So I don't know.
Yeah.
If if I were to I'm on a break from my series, but once I start doing it again, I'm gonna like play tracks that I've played before that I
Play
want
the stuff
to
that
share
you
with people.
love,
Yeah, yeah,
people, good music in any genre doesn't have a shelf life. And so
yeah. It's true.
coming up, the people that, I considered mentors, would say, it's 50-50. You play
Yeah,
50% new stuff or unreleased stuff or stuff that you made, and then 50% of stuff that people may know or that came out earlier. Um,
mm-hmm.
Especially like now with technology the way it is, with like a DJ controller, you could take a song that came out in 1994, and
Yeah,
you can redo it live in the mix and create something new. And for somebody who wasn't around when that track originally came out, they're going to think it's something brand new. And when you incorporate that with new stuff, it creates an energy that I think that it's actually a necessity now, because you have people making like 4-minute tracks,
mm-hmm.
and that sometimes have no intro or outro, right? And so and because there's so much of it and it's so oversaturated, there's a lot of stuff that I play that other DJs might not, because like I'll go and I'll flip through the track and find like 2 or 3 minutes that's like the bomb, that's got a rhythm.
Mm,
The rest of the track, it's kind of like hip hop back in the day, where they would just find the break or the good part, right?
yeah,
And play it. Oh, have two copies of it. So for me, like, you have to do that now.
mm,
And it, like, I will listen to every genre. Like, I don't care what it is on, Beatport or Track Source. I kind of come at it from the days of working in a record store, going to a record store. I would listen to everything in the store and buy whatever I liked, even if it was like
yeah,
a short part of the song. So, you kind of have to do that now in order to, be unique and have something that's different. But yeah, I mean, it's at a point now where, that's kind of what you have to do. And, unless you're, only playing Afro house or only playing this, to me, the worst thing to happen to house music is subgenres, because the
mm,
culture before the music became the music, it was lots of different styles of things, because there wasn't house, right? There was danceable
mm,
R&B and disco and things like, and new wave and all that. So now it's like, it's so broken up, and it, I
mm,
think, like you said earlier, it really divides us even more. So
yeah,
you got to really, like, try, like, that would be my advice to someone who is starting out, right? Would be to listen to everything. uh, Try not to listen to all the noise from people around you, and
mm,
really create your own sound. And because when I first started, like, really mixing, I was really into like soulful house. Like, even
mm,
I was used to be really into techno and went to raves, and I honestly said this, and I will say it on this video. I said that I will never be able to dance all night to house music. And I said it to my buddy Lee Jones in Philly. And if I send this to Lee and he sees this, he's gonna laugh, because it's true. But when I lived in New York, I really got into soulful house.
mm,
I went from going to Limelight and places like that, where it was a heavier sound, to going to like Sound Factory Bar.
mm,
And I would be in there from open to close, and Frankie Knuckles would play. We became friends because I was always there, and me being me, as a young buck, I actually gave him a mixtape. And this is funny, and it's almost embarrassing, but it's funny. So I gave him a tape, and the mixing was absolute crap. Like, it was terrible. But most of the songs were his remixes, which is even
Yeah.
more embarrassing, right? But but like I loved Frankie. He was such a nice person, and like he was very like accepting. So he was like, I really like the music, obviously, but you have to go out and you have to find your own sound.
Mm.
And all these years, that's really stuck with me. And I don't know if that. I think that's a lost art where people just want to get booked, so they'll play the popular sound, or they'll play
Mm.
one sound so their mixing is on point. And that would be another piece of advice for people that are starting out, or kind of stuck, is that
Yeah,
the mixing is not as important as the music. And I know like people are going
that's
to hear that
true.
and be like, that's ridiculous. But like I remember one of my first gigs in New York, I still couldn't mix, but I had records,
Mm.
that and not only did I have records that I went to the store and bought, but especially when I worked at Virgin Megastore, like all these labels, Strictly Nervous, 8 Ball, they were not in the store.
Mm.
And the reps would come in there and they're like, I would be the guy, and I would do my best to get their stuff in the store. And, in turn, I would get invited to all their parties and get hooked up with the same records that, like famous DJs were playing. So I had good records. And I remember showing up at this gig, and with 5 bags of records. And I had learned on how to mix mix in quotes, on a Yuri mixer, which is a rotary mixer. And
Mm.
this board was a Newmark board with faders, and I had no idea how to use it. I certainly didn't know how to mix, and my mixing was absolute garbage. But
Mm.
um, it was a club called Barracuda. It was like a gay, like a drag queen bar,
Mm.
and I would play in between, and then afterward. And I would have people constantly come, and I was so nervous. I never played anywhere live before, and just on the radio where they can't see you. And people were coming up to me and telling me how great the music was, and nobody
Mm.
cared about the mixing at all. Like, and I knew it was terrible. Like, I knew it. I was like, I'm going to get this. I'm going to figure it out. But it doesn't matter. So don't be afraid to like kind of experiment and listen
Mm.
to music in a broader sense, where don't worry like to me there's only two kinds of music, good or bad. And these subgenres, it doesn't matter. I mean, like I remember reading Tony Humphrey said the magic number is 123 beats per minute. You
Mm.
can play anything you want, and no matter what the sound is, at 123, and everybody will dance to it. And so like
Mm.
that may or may not be true, but that sentiment is something that really opened my eyes, because it's like, wow, I'm going to try to play as many like I like to go from like house to techno to maybe like a Latin vibe, over and over, acid, whatever. And not stay in one place at one time, because I feel like it's like you have that shock value where you play something different at the right time and people will vibe to it. And so like that's really it. Be open
Mm.
to new and different sounds, not like I play everything from soulful to like harder techno stuff that I might pitch down to play on a house group. You know what I mean? So um that's something that I don't know about you, but I feel like that's lacking, especially like when you go out and hear a lot of people play, that there isn't a lot of that, and there used to be.
Yeah, well, I really haven't gone out very much lately. The last several years, last few years, especially. I actually haven't really been out, but maybe 2 or 3 times since before the pandemic,
Yeah,
or since the pandemic,
same.
started and has been over. But I don't know. I live in a really small city. Like I said, I'm an hour and a half from Minneapolis, and so
Right,
everything here is pretty much mainstream, and
right,
there's so yeah, it's I don't know. I'm not really qualified to say what's happening these days.
right. Like I mean, like even like listening to like different DJs like guest mixes.
Mm.
It's like it's refreshing when you send a mix and the person that you're sending it to is like, wow, I haven't heard,
Mm.
most of what people are sending me is this. and there's
Yeah.
no right or wrong to it, but when it's unique and different, no matter where you live or no matter whether you're going out or listening to it online, like you can always tell when it's different,
Hmm.
and what sets it apart from other stuff.
Yeah.
And like for me, it's so important to me personally to find unique and different sounds to play, regardless of what the mixing outcome would be, because I come from a time where it was really about the vibe that was created, and sometimes even when the beats might have been a little off, it still
Yeah.
had this energy level that is unbeatable. Like I was recently listening to the closing party at Sound Factory where Junior Vasquez played all night for hours,
Mm.
and I've been there and I've experienced it, and I went to all the revival parties and anniversary parties and stuff, and um, you know you kind of think that everything was just so perfect, when you're looking back at it. But I
Mm.
listened to this thing, and not every mix was perfect, but the vibe that was created was just so intense that like it really didn't matter. It's just like,
Right.
oh man, those two sounds together is just wow, like
Yeah,
wow,
that's true.
and I don't necessarily hear that today,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, do you have any parting sentiment before we wrap up the episode?
Uh, Always be yourself, and the right people
Mm.
will gravitate towards you and what you do,
Yeah.
and they will be accepting of whatever it is that you are offering. If you are always just who you are, and you believe in what you're doing as far as music is concerned, it's more important than any of this other stuff that's going on around you that is relatively insignificant in comparison to you being true to who you are and true to your music, is the most
Mm.
important thing. It has nothing to do with track source, beatport, or any of these things. It's really about how much love you're putting out there with your music. You'll get the people that want to be a part of that will be. And it's really about like your friends and your fans, like being part of that journey with you, not, the DJ and then the dancers or people that are listening to your mix shows. It's all one thing.
I love it. Well, thank you again for the conversation, and yeah, I wish you the best with your move. And
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
It's
sure
going to be
we'll keep in touch on the
yeah,
socials, and
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, maybe we can meet in person someday. Hey, friend, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As producers today, it can be really overwhelming to keep up with all the tasks that we need to complete. So I've created a free toolkit that can help you. I call it my release roadmap. This tool helps you to gain clarity on all of your tasks related to music production, demos, releases, and social media so that you can spend more mental energy on making music. Learn more about this free roadmap by visiting tonyfuel.com/roadmap or click the link in the description below. Again, that link is tonyfuel.com/roadmap. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.